there's a consensus amongst philosophers. Ha! Caught you looking. No, there isn't. There is no consensus amongst philosophers about anything, not even on the definition of philosophy. Ask 100,000 philosophers for their definition of philosophy, and you will get 100,000 different answers. Ask any one philosopher for their definition of philosophy, and beware, if you dare, make sure you have a fresh coffee and a comfortable chair. Or in my case, maybe a dance floor. That's right, you can dance to my take on philosophy. You can move to it. You can groove to it. 'Cause I distilled it and killed it. I mined it, refined it. I rhymed it and primed it. You'll find it insane. I've made it very plain. A simple refrain you can sustain in your brain and still make your train. Or better yet, remain to experience the finer grain. All right, here we go. There are only two questions in all philosophy, and they are what is and what ought to be. That's right, every philosophical question over the centuries has been a version of what is or what ought to be. You'll see. What is justice? Asked Socrates. He was asking both what is and what ought to be in a single question. That's a clue for later, but for right now, if you could definitively say what is and what ought to be, you'd be the grand champion of philosophy. Now check this out. Philosophy and religion and science, those three, are all three about what is and what ought to be. Those three were all one thing before they split, you see, born of our need to know what is and what ought to be. You see, originally, religionally, if you wanted to know what is and what ought to be, the elders would tell you. Their rules would compel you. Get caught working it out for yourself, bad things befell you. See, we homos are social beings. That's how we operate. We work to one goal as a team. We cooperate. We literally die on our own and thrive with our mates. That's actually what makes us such great apes. We care for one another, and we do this most comfortably when we agree on what is and what ought to be. So religion is a pact where we all agree to agree about what is and what ought to be. It sets the answers in stone, so no one ever needs to get thrown. When it's time to act, we follow the pact. The most righteous move is easily known. But here's the thing, we're always learning new things. Our minds are constantly blown. This makes us question all we've been told and come up with some thoughts of our own. But such thoughts are suppressed because the ancients knew best. Their wisdom passed the test, and you just guessed. But you did more than that. You reasoned it out. You updated your priors, that's what I'm talking about. And so philosophy was born, a new way to be. Agnostic about what is and what ought to be. Questioning all you've been told, even all that you see. Daring to be bold and setting your mind free. But at what cost you might now find you disagree with your very own mother about what is and what ought to be. Oh no! Can we have it both ways? Can our minds act free, and you and me and she still somehow agree about what is and what ought to be? Well, yes, says me, and I hope you'll all agree. But for that to happen, I think we'll all need to be just a little bit better at this thing called philosophy. Greetings, fellow Earthlings and philosophers, and welcome to the Ordinary Language Philosopher Thingamajiggy. That's what I'm going with. Thingamajiggy. I don't know what else to call it. Podcast doesn't seem quite right, even though I will probably make this available on podcast platforms, but it's not really a podcast. It's actually going to start out more like a philosophy paper or a philosophy book. But it's not a philosophy paper, and it's not a philosophy book. It's just going to have a family resemblance to those things at first, and then it could evolve into something like a podcast. Honestly, I have no idea what it is or where it's going, so for right now anyway, welcome to the Ordinary Language Philosopher Thingamajiggy. I am the Ordinary Language Philosopher, I guess. That's the handle I've decided to go with for this Thingamajiggy, because it has that cool double meaning that's so great to get into the title of whatever it is you're doing. I'm an Ordinary Language Philosopher two ways. First, I want this Thingamajiggy to appeal to both professional philosophers and to armchair philosophers, and even to people who are just philosophy curious. And I know that there are many such people out there who have ventured into philosophy only to find it frustratingly, annoyingly, inaccessible due to its extensive use of esoteric language and technical jargon. And that is fair, on both sides actually, and we'll get into that. But anyway, I thought that the ordinary language philosopher would sound to the philosophy curious like, oh good, someone is going to present philosophy in ordinary language that everyone can understand. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I am that kind of ordinary language philosopher. So welcome to the Philosophy Curious. And then professional philosophers, academic philosophers, will recognize that the term ordinary language philosophy is, quite ironically, technical jargon in academic philosophy. If I tell a professional philosopher that I'm an ordinary language philosopher, I've just told them like 20,000 words about my philosophical orientation. It's like a ridiculously condensed shorthand. Ordinary language philosophy refers to an entire school of philosophy that was born around the middle of the 20th century. And as it happens, I am quite simpatico with the core ideas, at least, of this particular school of philosophy. So that makes me an ordinary language philosopher in technical academic terms as well. So there you have it, duly appropriate show title and moniker. Let's go. I have extremely lofty goals with this thingamajiggy. I aim to challenge prevailing winds in academic philosophy on technical grounds, and to simultaneously be intelligible and edifying to the philosophy curious. You heard me. I'm going to try to do new technical philosophy and popularize philosophy at the same time. It's hard to even say that out loud without laughing. That is a ridiculously tall order, perhaps a delusionally tall order. And yet, I'm feeling good about it. I think I can do it. And there is no try, there is only do, right? So LFG. But wait, my tall order gets even taller. Here's why this thingamajiggy is happening. I have a huge problem. I have a theory of everything. Wait, why would having a theory of everything be a problem? Why did I just say I have a theory of everything in the same tone of voice that I would say I have type 2 diabetes? Because if you believe you have a theory of everything, you are a legit crazy person. And I don't want to be that loon who thinks he has a theory of everything. Unfortunately, though, I have a theory of everything. And at this point in time anyway, I can't seem to unhave it. But maybe you can help me out with that. Now, there are two mitigating factors here that I think maybe make me not a loon. So hear me out. The first is that all of the constituents of my theory of everything, that is, all of the individual ideas that make it up, are not my ideas, but the ideas and theories of other philosophers. Ideas and theories that already exist in the philosophical literature. Ideas that have been debated at length, for millennia in some cases. So when I say that I have a theory of everything, I'm only referring to this particular curation and configuration and presentation of pre-existing philosophical ideas. I take zero credit for any of the ideas that I'm about to present, but I will take the blame for all of them because here I am putting them forward. So I'm taking none of the credit and all of the blame. The loons don't usually do that, right? And the second mitigating factor to this crazy person alert that really should be going off in your head right now. I'd be worried for you if it wasn't. The second mitigating factor is that the first of these pre-existing philosophical ideas that I am curating into my theory of everything is a sort of base position that Western philosophers call fallibilism. Now that's a bit of jargon that actually sounds like what it means. Fallibilism is simply the acceptance that you could always be wrong about anything that you currently know. Your knowledge is fallible. Fallibilism is what Western philosophers call it, but you will find this very same idea in the first principles of ancient Eastern traditions like Advaita Vedanta, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, and it also shows up in indigenous cultures all over the world. It is a very old, seemingly universal human idea. The wisdom of uncertainty. What makes it wise is that it causes you to continuously scrutinize your beliefs. If you believe you could always be wrong about anything that you currently know, you tend to always be on the lookout for evidence that you are wrong, so you can find out if you're wrong and stop being wrong, and stop acting on bad information. So rather than shaking your confidence in your beliefs, fallibilism, or the wisdom of uncertainty, can actually have the effect of making you quite confident in your beliefs, because you know that they are endlessly scrutinized. So you end up being as confident as you possibly could be, and perhaps should be, in your beliefs. Okay, quick recap. Here's the setup. I have a theory of everything. So, crazy person alert, but the constituents of my theory of everything are mostly the ideas of other philosophers. And as a fallibilist, I recognize that one or all of us might actually be wrong, which gives me confidence that one or all of us might actually be right. And, acting as a good fallibilist, I am, here and now, going to present this theory of everything to all of you to max vet it. Alright, so this thingamajiggy is a two-way street. Its purpose is to elicit feedback, pushback, or even a good sound thrashing. Indeed, a good sound thrashing would be the most wonderful thing, if a good sound thrashing is in order. Please relieve me of my problem. Talk me down off this ledge. In the comments below. So here's what I'm going to do right here, right now, in this first video. I guess I'll call this Chapter 1. I'm going to lay out a very broad overview of the overall theory in very condensed form and in very plain language. 2 hours from now, you will all have a very good overview of this theory of everything that I have, and can't seem to unhave. I know 2 hours is a long video, but this is a theory of everything. Be thankful it's not 12 hours. And of course, being a theory of everything, it comes complete with the meaning of life. You know, the answers to all of the why questions. I mean, obviously it has to do that, or what am I even talking about, right? So it's worth the hang. And it's going to be both technical for the pros and intelligible to the joes. Alright. End of preamble. Let's go. We should probably start here. What is a theory of everything? What is this thing that I'm claiming to have? Well, it's not a theory of everything, that's for sure. It's a theory of everything. Most people think of a theory of everything like a scientific theory of everything, like what Newton and Einstein and Stephen Hawking were chasing. But that is a scientific theory of everything, which is not a theory of everything. A theory of everything should certainly reference the most up-to-date and credible scientific information that we have, but a theory of everything can only be a philosophical theory because philosophy exists at a slightly deeper level than science. And I know that there are some scientists out there who would like to say otherwise, but I think it's important to point out that they would need to use philosophy, not science, to say so. Because if you want to tell me anything at all about science, including what science is, what science does, and what science tells us, you're actually doing philosophy, not science. In fact, when scientists are communicating their science to the public or even to the press, they're actually mostly doing philosophy. Because the public at large can generally not understand science in its pure form of data points, detector results, and complex high-level math equations. So scientists need to interpret their data points and complex high-level math equations and then translate them into words. Words like cause, and effect, and force, and physical, and energy, and electromagnetism, and field, and particle, and wave function, and reality, and the universe, and the world, and knowledge, and proof, and true. Not one of these words shows up in any scientific data point, detector result, or complex high-level math equations. Scientists need to translate their data points and equations into words like these and then use these words in sentences. And this translation process from data points and equations into words and sentences is not a scientific process. It's a philosophical process. What words and sentences mean is the project of philosophy, not science. What this means is that all scientists need to also do philosophy whenever they want to translate their data points and equations into words and sentences that communicate their findings to the public, or even to each other. or even to themselves. And some scientists are better philosophers than others, meaning some scientists do a better job than others of translating the data points and equations into words and sentences. It is possible to be the most brilliant scientist and at the same time to be the most woefully confused philosopher. But of course there are also many brilliant scientists who are also great philosophers. They are the ones who are not getting all huffy about what I'm saying right now. And of course I also need to point out that it is possible to be the most highly accredited professional philosopher and at the same time to be the most woefully confused philosopher. I might be the most woefully confused philosopher. Hopefully I'll find out in the comments. Anyway, I'm going to have to come back to science and this particular point in a moment. Right now I need to deal with the elephant in the room. What is philosophy? What is this thing that I keep talking about that I claim is the only possible medium for a theory of everything because it exists at a deeper level than science? Well, as I said in my opening rhyme, I hope you liked that, by the way. I like to rhyme. I do it all the time, except when I don't. But do not dismay. There's more on the way. Later. So in my opening rhyme, I laid down my first bold proclamation. I said that philosophy and religion and science are all about two things and two things only: what is and what ought to be. And that's true. Take it to the bank. I distilled it and killed it. At least until I find out otherwise from people presenting legitimate counterexamples in the comments. But until then, I am confidently asserting that philosophy is entirely about what is and what ought to be. But notice that's what I'm saying philosophy is about, not what philosophy actually is. So what actually is philosophy? What is? What is ought to be? Well, the most important answer to these questions is a little too obvious, it seems, because most people miss it, including most philosophers in history. They look right past it. But if you stand back and look for the obvious, you'll see it. The most important and most obvious answer to these questions is they are words. They are language. Is not a thing, it's a word. Ought to be is not a thing, it's a group of words. These deep philosophical questions are words. They're language. So if we're going to talk about philosophy at all, it seems to me that the first thing that we need to notice about philosophy, and the first thing that we need to say about philosophy, is that it is done with language. Language is the medium of philosophy. And notice that language is also the medium of religion and science. All three are done in the medium of language and could not be done without language. And yes, math is also a language. This symbol represents the word two. Like any other word, it's in the dictionary and it has an agreed upon conventional definition. This symbol represents the word plus. It's also in the dictionary and has an agreed upon conventional definition. This symbol represents the word equals. Again, in the dictionary and has an agreed upon conventional definition. The agreed upon conventional definitions of these words are what give them their function. No junction, no function. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is only true if we all agree on the definitions of the words to, and plus, and equals, and for, and is, and true. Just like bachelor equals unmarried man is only true if we all agree on the definitions of the words bachelor, and equals, and unmarried, and man, and is, and true. Truths in language, including the language of math, are true by convention. Don't ever get that twisted. In fact, that's worth saying again. Truths in language, including the language of math, are true by convention. Don't ever get that twisted. So to understand what philosophy is, and also to understand what religion and science and math are, we first need to understand their medium, language. So look what happened. First I said that philosophy exists at a deeper level than science, and now here I am pointing to something that seems to exist at a deeper level than philosophy, language. And just like in quantum physics, things start to get weird when you get this deep. Because we will now need to use language to talk about what language is, which seems weird and circular and not ideal, but what are you going to do? The only alternative is to not talk about language, ever, just because it's weird that you have to use language to talk about language. So here's me giving it a go, trying to use language to talk about what language is. And perhaps more importantly, to talk about what language is not. So here I am using language right now to communicate these thoughts and ideas to you. But before I did that, I had to use language to formulate these thoughts and ideas in the first place. And now I'm using it to communicate those thoughts and ideas to you. So it seems that language is, at the very least, something that we use to formulate thoughts and ideas, and then to communicate those thoughts and ideas to other humans, to other language speakers. Hence the convention, other language speakers. So what are thoughts and ideas, and why do we want or need to communicate them to other humans? Oh no. First I said that philosophy exists at a deeper level than science, and then I said that language exists at a deeper level than philosophy, and now here I am pointing to something deeper still, thoughts and ideas. We are now 3 levels deeper than science, 2 levels deeper than philosophy. But you can relax now, scientists. We're almost done this deep dive, and then it's all uphill from here, I promise. Thoughts and ideas are something that occur in your experience, and your experience is rock bottom. It all starts with you are having an experience. This is the one thing that cannot be an illusion, they say. You are having an experience. Now, there are naysayers that this is rock bottom. There are those who say you cannot assume there is a you having the experience. They say the most you can say is experience is happening. They say that this subjective you that you speak of is an unwarranted assumption or an illusion. And what I like to do is just very quickly poke these people in the eye and then say, I didn't do that. But you don't have to go that far if you don't want to. You can just ask them who they're talking to. I don't think I need to convince you that you're having a subjective experience. I think that you know damn well that you are. We experience subjectivity like we experience breathing. It is omnipresent our entire lives. In fact, I can actually halt my breathing longer than I can halt the subjective nature of my experience. I mean, maybe if I practice meditation every day for 5 years, I might maybe be able to halt the subjective nature of my experience for as long as I can hold my breath, but probably not even then. I would probably be kidding myself if I thought I could or did. By the way, holding your breath as long as you possibly can is just one of the many excellent ways to notice the very subjective nature of your experience. The universe isn't about to pass out. You are. Just you. I mean, even if you are high-level meditating and you've achieved total ego dissolution, or you're peaking on a DMT trip, it's still just you that's going to pass out if you don't take a breath. We'll all be fine, I assure you. So we can define the self as the one who turns blue in the face when they don't take a breath, while other selves look on with concern. If someone is telling you that your subjectivity or your self is an illusion, they are, first of all, doing philosophy, which means they are using language to communicate their thoughts and ideas to you, which means they are well aware that there is a you who has your own thoughts and ideas and doesn't have access to their thoughts and ideas, and so they need to speak their thoughts and ideas out loud to get them into your head. If they don't believe in selves, who are they talking to? Ask them. If you don't believe in selves, talking is pointless, so shush you. And none of this negates the idea of monism, by the way. If you love the idea of monism, if you feel monism, if you feel a spiritual connection to everything in the universe, me too. I love that feeling of being connected to everyone and everything. It makes perfect sense to me to think of the universe as being all one thing, and that you and I are in no sense separate from it or even separate from each other. But notice I cannot even express that sentiment without employing the concepts of you and I and each other. If the universe is all one thing, then it is the type of thing in which there are humans having subjective experiences as surely as they are breathing. If there is monism, it contains pluralism. If your subjectivity or your self is an illusion, then your whole life is an illusion. It's not, and it makes no sense to talk that way. We are, each of us, having a very subjective experience of being in a world, a universe, an environment. I'm using all 3 of those words interchangeably, by the way. A world, a universe, an environment. Same. I'm also using the word experience to refer to what many philosophers call consciousness, and what many other philosophers call mind. All three of these words are generally used to refer to the same thing. I personally find the words consciousness and mind to be problematic in ways that the word experience is not, but that's just my preference. I think that the word consciousness, especially with that ness stuck on the end, sort of thingifies or stuffifies what I want to talk about in a way that the word experience does not. Consciousness sounds like it's referring to a substrate of experience rather than to experience itself. And for this conversation, I think that the word mind is a little too closely associated with the biological brain and can cause some confusion for that reason. So I prefer the term experience. I think it captures what I'm talking about best, so that's the term I'll be using. But again, that's my preference. If you prefer the term consciousness, we're probably talking about the same thing. I think we are conscious, of course, which I equate with experiencing, but I wouldn't put the suffix ness onto the end of the word experience. I wouldn't say experience-ness, and so I don't like it on the end of the word conscious either. There may be a few contexts where I do use the word mind to refer to the same thing. I may have already done that, but I will not be using the word consciousness at all. One other language note, I will sometimes be referring to you or your experience. And it may sound like I am presuming to know you, and I shouldn't do that because I have no direct access to your experience. But there is a sense in which I do know you. I don't know you personally, but I do know humans in general because I am one and because I've lived around them my entire life. I think we all know humans in general because we are one and we've lived around them our entire lives. I think there is such a thing as a general human situation underlying all of our separate cultures and individuality. And I'm only referring to this base human condition when I refer to you or your experience. And yes, I recognize that I'm doing so in a language and from a culture that influences my view of the world and humanity. But again, what are you going to do? I think you need to press on in these situations, doing your best. So with all of that in mind, I am framing this rock-bottom starting position as you are having a very subjective experience of being in this world as a human surrounded by other humans. Other humans are the most salient feature of this world, this universe, this environment that you are experiencing. And based on their behavior, you perceive these other humans as having their own subjective experiences that seem to be virtually identical to your own experience in so many ways, and yet somehow profoundly unique to them in a way that is inaccessible to you directly. This is the essence of subjective experience. The experience of being a self surrounded by other very similar but not identical selves. Now, there's another annoying argument that some people want to make here. They say, okay, sure, you're having a subjective experience, but you have no way of knowing that others are also having subjective experiences because you have no access to their experience. They could be mindless automatons with no subjective experience at all, for all you know. And again, I think this is a situation where you can just go ahead and poke these people in the eye. Or ask them who they're talking to. I'm sorry if you think the poke in the eye thing is harsh. There are many great philosophers in history, but I'm here to tell you that there are also many philosophers in history who deserve a poke in the eye. Gently, of course. Comedically. Okay, maybe I just mean metaphorically. Maybe. I do think that some minor price should be paid for putting forth such annoying and non-explanatory theories. That's the issue. If your theory is both annoying and non-explanatory, how about flick of the ear? That's not bad. Because you're right, poke in the eye is a little severe, even if done gently and comedically. I like flick of the ear. A good flick, though. If I'm giving up poke in the eye, it better be a damn good flick of the ear. For putting forth such annoying and non-explanatory theories. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Okay, regroup. Rock bottom. You are having a very subjective experience of being in a world with other humans whose own subjective experience seems virtually identical to your own experience in so many ways, and yet somehow is profoundly unique to them in a way that is inaccessible to you directly. And it seems to you that they have no access to your experience either. There is something that it feels like to be you, and it appears as though there is something that it feels like to be them, and those feelings are very, very similar but not identical and inaccessible to each other directly. and what it feels like to be you at all times falls on a scale between good and bad. Philosophers and psychologists call this good-bad scale valence. At any given time, it can feel very, very good to be you, or it can feel very, very bad to be you, and it can feel all points in between. And you not only have a preference for feeling good over bad, you kind of insist on it. In fact, I believe that the only coherent definition of the word good is in reference to the way you prefer to feel and kind of insist on feeling. And the only coherent definition of the word bad is the way you most definitely do not want to feel and kind of insist on not feeling. For example, if you are not feeling hunger right now or thinking about getting food, you will be soon enough. Within 3 or 4 hours since your last meal, you will start to feel hunger. It starts out feeling just like a notification, but if you don't eat something soon, it will start to make you feel bad. And this bad feeling, this suffering, will grow and grow exponentially until you get something to eat. And within a couple of days, unless you are fasting on purpose, this suffering will be so bad that you would do almost anything to get food. At this point, you would steal to get food, perhaps using violence if necessary. And within a week, or 2 at the most, you would be fully prepared to kill someone for food if that was the only option available to you. You would, very unfortunately, need to insist on that. But don't worry, you will almost certainly not need to kill anyone to get food when you get hungry very shortly. Because of the type of social animal we are, you will instinctively be aware that the best way for you to get food is by interacting and communicating and cooperating with these other humans around you, as opposed to going out into the wilderness to get your own food. And the same is true for sheltering and mating, the lack of which will also make you very grumpy and very scrappy in a hurry. You instinctively know that you need to live your entire life through interaction and communication and cooperation with these other humans around you, whose own subjective experience seems virtually identical to your own in so many ways, and yet somehow profoundly unique to them in a way that is inaccessible to you directly. And it is this inaccessibility to each other's subjective experience that makes communication necessary. Your experience is filled with feelings and desires and thoughts and ideas. And because we are a social species, it is in your best interest to share and communicate at least some of these feelings, desires, thoughts, and ideas with others. So how do you do that? How do you share or communicate your subjective experience of feelings, desires, thoughts, and ideas with others? Language? Is that how we share and communicate our subjective experience of feelings, desires, thoughts, and ideas with others? Now here is where it is so very important to point out that when it comes to communication between living organisms, and even for communication between humans, language is very, very late to the party. The very first single-celled organisms communicated with each other 4 billion years ago. And every living thing since, all animals, all plants, communicate with each other non-linguistically. And even for us humans, language is a brand spanking new form of communication. Now by humans here, I'm not just referring to us Homo sapiens, I'm also referring to all of the homos who came before us. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis. All of the homos, the humans, who lived very much like our species for millions of years without language. They were a very social, cooperative species just like us. They lived in tribes and had to work together to survive. They made tools, they created shelter, they had division of labor, responsibilities. They played games together, they taught each other crafts and skills. They made and communicated plans. Hunting and gathering plans, child-rearing plans, defense plans, relocation plans, feelings, emotions, bonds, threats, all thought and communicated to one another without language, for millions of years. You can imagine all of the ways that humans communicated with one another before language came along by noticing all of the non-linguistic ways in which we still communicate with one another alongside this newcomer called language. Body language comes to mind first because we use that term for it even though it's not technically a language. Body movements and posture are a very different and far more ancient form of communication than language. You can communicate pride, bravery, meekness, aggression, fear, sadness, sympathy, jubilation, love, all with just the most subtle differences in the way you are standing or sitting or lying. But you are not communicating the word pride with your posture. You are communicating the subjective experience that the word pride is intended to refer to. And it may be the case that your posture alone communicates that experience with higher fidelity than words can. And that's just your posture. Now add movement. Full body movements, head movements, arm movements, hand and finger gestures, finger pointing, fist pumping, knee bending, knee slapping, foot taps, foot stomps, toe wiggles, dancing. This is all still just body language. Now add these things we call the window to the soul, our eyes. A gaze, a glance, a glare, a stare. Now add the millions of unique facial contortions we are capable of making with our mouths, our cheeks, our nostrils, our foreheads. Now add all of the non-linguistic vocalizations that we make. Moans and groans, yips and yells, whines and cries, whistles and pops, hollering, humming, laughing, animal impersonations, making fart noises with your mouth. These are all vocal, but not language. They are a form of vocal communication that is different in kind from language. Now add communication by touch. Shaking hands, holding hands, high-fiving, hugging, kissing, caressing, grooming, massaging, making whoopee, pinching, shoving, slapping. Punching you square in the nose is a pretty unambiguous form of communication. And how about drawing? A line in the sand, a diagram in the dirt, a painting on a cave wall, art, and music. Oh, how we communicate with art and music. Perhaps we communicate the most with art and music. That may be what we find so beautiful in art and music. The exceptionally high fidelity of the shared intersubjective experience that it achieves. I'm going to suggest, as others have, that all of these far more ancient non-linguistic forms of communication are higher fidelity forms of communication than language. The term high fidelity here refers to a transfer of information that is as true to the original as possible. Like a quality sound recording is one that is most true to the original. It has the highest fidelity to the original. In this case, the original is your subjective experience. When a parent feels proud of their child, it is a felt experience. And the parent wants to share or communicate this felt experience with their child. And this is almost certainly achieved with higher fidelity by their eyes, their face, a hug and a sigh than it is with the spoken words, "I'm so proud of you." I mean, haven't we all seen someone say words of this sort and known by their eyes and their posture that they didn't actually mean them? Language is certainly a powerful new way of both thinking and communicating, and it has transformed human culture dramatically, profoundly. Its specialness may be in allowing us to both think and communicate certain elements of our experience with extremely high precision, like a scalpel slicing our experience into distinct bits that reveal useful patterns. But by specializing in this type of high-precision bitifying of experience, perhaps linguistic communications can be missing critical depth and context, fidelity to the original experience that they are trying to translate. Everyone understands what is meant by the saying, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." People instantly grasp the truth of this aphorism, but most philosophers would now agree that it is almost certainly a gross understatement. It's quite likely that to fully communicate your subjective experience would require a larger number of words than you could speak in a lifetime, if it is possible at all. If you're trying to convey a subjective experience to someone who has no direct access to it, you're in tough any way you slice it, but you'd have a better chance of doing so with a dance and a tune than you do with words. Of course, you can use both, but it is important to note that one of these things is not like the others. This ineptness of language to properly translate and therefore communicate our subjective experience is one of the oldest ideas we find in human religions and ancient wisdom traditions. and it appears all over the world. It's one of the oldest insights that our ancestors noticed and voiced about language, the observation that our experience is ineffable. Words and sentences and numbers cannot fully capture it and communicate it with high fidelity. You can probably see how this ancient idea goes hand in hand with that other ancient idea I mentioned earlier, fallibilism, the wisdom of uncertainty. If for no other reason because words are imperfect at best. To visualize this age-old insight, imagine a large blank screen. And let's say this blank screen represents the canvas of a subjective experience that you want to communicate to others. Now imagine a very thin pencil line originating in the top left corner of the screen and angling down towards the bottom right-hand corner. And along the way it jogs slightly once or twice before continuing its path towards the bottom right corner. Now think of this line as a sentence describing the experience. You can see how it only captures a micro portion of the overall experience, but there's something very useful about the way that it sliced up the experience, directing and pointing to precise points along its path. Whereas a smile or a hug or a dance or a tune might look more like large gradient blobs that capture a larger portion of the overall experience, but are perhaps missing some or all of the information on the line. Now this visual is completely made up by me, I just pulled it out of my ass. I'm not saying this is how I think it is, this is just one way to maybe kind of visualize the age-old idea that words come nowhere even close to fully capturing or translating our subjective experience. Language is a very different kind of communication from anything that existed before it. It comes 4 billion years into the story of life and communication. I have no doubt that it represents a critical advance in both thought and communication. But is it purely an advance in communication? Or is it possible that, because of its above-mentioned limits and properties, language could also be a confounder of communication? Not in all cases, maybe not even in most cases. Maybe only in a few key cases. Like in the cases that lie at the very heart of philosophy, for example. People don't argue much over the meanings of most words. Sun, water, house, tree, horse, cat, road, go, stop, drink, jump, up, over, and, the, list, goes, on, and on. This is a very long list with tens of thousands of entries. But then there is this comparatively tiny micro-list of trouble words that have been giving philosophers fits for millennia. The meanings of these words in philosophy remain contentious to this day. Words like reality, exist, truth, knowledge, cause, belief, information, explanation, nature, right, wrong, good, bad, moral, justice, meaning, free, will. There's a few more words in this category, but not a lot more. It's a surprisingly small list of words that seem to cause virtually all of our confusion and disagreement. And when you look closely, you'll notice that most of the words on this list are actually synonyms for one another. So this tiny list is even tinier still. Now think about this in the context of what we just noticed about language in general and its inability to translate experience with high fidelity. And we are finally set up for me to be able to properly talk about what philosophy is, and about what ordinary language philosophy is. For millennia, philosophy has been about asking particular types of questions and positing answers to those questions. Questions that involve all of the above-mentioned trouble words. Questions like, what exists? How can we know that something exists? What is knowledge? What is reality? What is true? What is right and what is wrong? How ought we act? What is a good life? What is good? What is bad? And philosophers found it very difficult to answer these questions. And they were rightly surprised to encounter this seeming bewitchment. Because people use all of these words. A lot. All day, every day, in the most important conversations of their lives. And they use these words like they know exactly what they mean. So how can philosophers not know what they mean? It's not that philosophers haven't offered up answers to these questions or definitions for these terms over the centuries. Many have. But they all conflict with one another, and there remains no consensus. After thousands of years of carefully and meticulously examining and debating the meanings of the words on this tiny list of words, philosophers can still not come to a consensus on any of them. How can this be? These are just words after all. Well, there's the problem. Believe it or not, somehow, for millennia, Western philosophers at least didn't notice that these are just words after all. Philosophers were treating them like they're not just words. They were treating these trouble words especially as though they come with essential definitions. As though these words necessarily referred to fixed things that are detached from us. Things that exist objectively out there in a mind-independent place called the external world. And many philosophers and scientists are still treating words and language this way. And this way of treating words and language is an error. It is the error out of which all of the philosophical pseudo-problems are born. You heard me. Pseudo-problems. And these philosophical pseudo-problems are all dissolved by correcting this one key error. Now, I am trying to keep the technical references to a bare minimum in this opening chapter, but this one is central, so I do need to point out here that I am very loosely paraphrasing the ideas of the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein, who became one of the most highly cited philosophers of the 20th century for having spotted and called out this critical error being made by virtually all philosophers, including himself. He was spotting his own error and everyone else's. And with this insight, Wittgenstein seeded what came to be known as the School of Ordinary Language Philosophy, which I will from here on refer to as OLP, because I'm in a hurry. So again, the key error that Wittgenstein was pointing to was treating words as though they come with essential definitions or necessary reference, because they refer to things that exist in an objective world that is external to our mind or experience. Now, we're going to talk in a minute about whether or not it is warranted or even coherent to suppose the existence of an external world. You heard me. But regardless of whether or not you believe in such a thing, the important point being made here is that words cannot possibly be referring to an external objective world, because even if it exists, by definition, we have no access to it. We do not experience it, so we quite literally cannot be using our language to describe it. And so if we treat words as though that is what they are necessarily referring to, we are misunderstanding what language is, where language comes from, and what language does. So you don't actually need to give up on your belief in the external objective world, but for your own sake, you should come to understand that words do not and cannot be referring to it. Treating them like they do will surely cause the bewitchment of your intelligence by means of language. That's how Wittgenstein put it. He once referred to philosophy as the battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language. And by Joe, I think he's got it. That is what philosophy is. That is what ordinary language philosophy is. To me. My own distillation of this project of philosophy is that it is the ongoing endeavor to increase the fidelity of our linguistic communications so that they improve upon rather than confound our overall communication. It's about improving our language by noticing its limitations. And the first step in this battle against the bewitchment of our intelligence is the recognition that the referent of our language, what words refer to, is our experience of the world. We created our language to describe the world that we do experience, not an external objective world that we do not experience. The big deal difference here is that rather than words coming with essential definitions and external reference, we, the people, give words their definitions based on how we use them to describe our intersubjective experience of the world. And this recognition of what words actually refer to is what dissolves all of the old philosophical pseudo-problems. What exists? What is real? What is knowledge? What is true? What is fact? What is good? What is bad? What is justice? With the correct understanding of language, these all become pseudo-questions. And what I mean by a pseudo-question is any question that is answered by defining the terms used in the question. So if the asker of the question, "What is real?" knows the definition of the words they're using in that question, then they already have the answer. And if they do not know the definition of the terms that they're using in their question, then what they're really asking for is the definition of the terms. Either way, the question, "What exists?" is dissolved into the question, "What is the definition of the word exist?" And definitions of words are conventional. Remember what I said earlier about how truths in language are true by convention. Here we are not getting that twisted. I mean, this is Wittgenstein for sure, but even Aristotle noticed and said more than 2,000 years ago, the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. Asking what is reality is no different than asking what is a bachelor. The answer to the question, what is a bachelor, is not out there in some mind-independent realm that we have no access to. And so neither is the answer to the question, what is reality? Actually, there are a few philosophers, the kind I was mentioning earlier, who deserve a poke in the eye, who would dearly love to debate you about whether or not a bachelor actually needs to be unmarried. But they are being no more silly than philosophers who think there is still something to debate about when it comes to the question, what is reality? Reality isn't a special kind of word that gets its definition in a different way than the word bachelor does. There should be as much consensus about what is real as there is about what is a bachelor. Because you can find the meanings of both of these words in the same readily accessible place, in our conventional use of the terms. Words are tools that we use for translating our subjective experiences into a common conventional language so that we can communicate with other people whose own subjective experience is virtually identical to our own experience in so many ways, and yet somehow also profoundly unique to them in a way that is inaccessible to us directly. We have no choice but to work together on this project of coherent communication by language. We must meet on what I like to call the playing field of intersubjectivity, where we engage in a back-and-forth game of cross-referencing our respective subjective experiences to find both similarities and differences. And with that information, we co-create a language that does its best to draw a picture of our intersubjective world. We do this so we can work together, better and better, with more and more success. Unfortunately, our subjective experiences, although private and unique to each individual, are also so similar, so virtually identical in fact, that we are able to make congruent observations that are so precise we can jointly engineer and construct irrigation canals, and make medicine, and build monorails. We are able to do all of these things with languages that do not refer to an external objective world. We are able to do all of these things with languages that were co-created organically through intersubjective experience. Languages that refer to that intersubjective experience. Our individual subjective experiences do not need to be completely identical to form a language that enables us to build laser beam machines. Our languages were not handed down from above and beyond. They are not fixed, and they cannot be formalized and finalized and stored in a box. Technically, there is no such thing as a language, except for an instant, and then poof, it's gone. By the end of the day, some influencer has either added a new word, or changed the definition of an old word, or rendered a particular word taboo. Language is perpetually on the move, ground up, as we get better and better at the art of linguistic communication, skillfully and incrementally improving the fidelity of our linguistic communications. And we have a long, long way to go on this project. And we will continue to have a long, long way to go in perpetuity. This is our Sisyphus project, because our experience is ineffable and will always be ineffable. Nevertheless, we still can and ought to continue this project to improve the fidelity of our linguistic communications, even though we know we'll never come anywhere close to completing this project. Just like you never stop raising your child, even though you know you will never come anywhere close to completing that project. So the OLP argument goes that when we look at language this way, and we call this way the meaning is use theory of language, then all of the philosophical pseudo-problems that were created by looking at language the old erroneous way are dissolved. So what happened? I said that this revolutionary idea of Wittgenstein's came in the middle of the 20th century, and it promised to dissolve all of the old philosophical pseudo-problems in the way that I just outlined. And I'm sure you would have heard by now if there was a consensus that all of the old philosophical problems have been solved. That would have made the news. So what happened to this promise? Well, Wittgenstein died before this breakthrough idea of his was even published. And in his final writings, he didn't follow through and specifically demonstrate the dissolution of all of the old philosophical pseudo-problems. He just gave us the tools to do so, or so he thought. And the philosophers who he inspired to form this school of ordinary language philosophy did some fine work, but they too were not able to take Wittgenstein's insight and use it to definitively demonstrate the dissolution of all of the great philosophical problems. And ordinary language philosophy is still around today, but because it didn't finish philosophy in the way that Wittgenstein promised it would, OLP seems to have, well, lost its predominance might be a kind way to put it. Its sizzle has fizzled. So why did Wittgenstein's insight and this meaning is use theory of language not fulfill its promise to dissolve all of the old philosophical pseudo-problems? The first thing I'm going to say about that is, it should have, and I aim to show here that it does indeed fulfill its promise. But why didn't it happen already? Postmodernism was the charge that was leveled at OLP. And the problem with postmodernism is it does the scary thing and relativizes truth, don't you know? It says there is no the truth, there is only my truth and your truth. We all have our own truths. And this is threatening to the social order because we are a social species, and we do kind of need to mostly agree on what is and what ought to be if we're going to work together and survive. But does postmodernism necessarily relativize truth? Now, to the charge of being postmodernism, I have to say that Wittgenstein's idea is guilty as charged. But I'm going to refute the charge that Wittgenstein's postmodern move does the scary thing and relativizes truth. I'm going to illustrate how OLP does indeed fulfill its promise to dissolve all of the old philosophical pseudo-problems without relativizing truth. The scare line that was used to show that postmodernism relativizes truth, and the scare line that is still used today, is that the meaning is use theory of language says that something is true if it's useful. So if believing in God X makes you happy, then it is useful in that way, and therefore God X is true. And if you find that being racist is useful, then being racist is correct. I'm not sure why these obscurantist caricatures of ordinary language philosophy were able to win the day, but they did. I'm not sure why ordinary language philosophers were not able to properly dismiss and correct these misrepresentations, but they weren't. However, I feel like I can do so myself, so here goes. First, I need to defend postmodernism. Yikes. Not the caricature of postmodernism, not what postmodernism morphed into, but the core element of it. We did need some kind of postmodernism, because we discovered at some point that the pillar that modernism stood on is false. Modernism was ultimately underpinned by a belief in the mechanical theory of the universe as originally conceived by science. The mechanical view was that everything in the universe is ultimately made up of tiny little bits of stuff that bump into each other like billiard balls. And once we find the properties of these micro billiard balls, which we are very close to doing, by the way, we will then know everything. We will know the truth about reality with certainty. But science eventually had to abandon this mechanical theory of the universe, going all the way back to the 17th century, in fact, with the discoveries of Isaac Newton. Newton brilliantly calculated patterns that predict the motion of objects with incredible accuracy. But he simultaneously discovered that these billiard balls weren't actually making contact with each other. Some unexplained force was acting between them, and he could accurately predict the motion, but he could not explain the force. Newton was like, okay, I have this brilliant math formula that predicts the motion of all the objects that we see with such incredible accuracy we could probably put a man on the moon with it one day. So that's pretty awesome. But I also discovered that nothing is actually touching anything, And whatever is causing this motion is some crazy-ass voodoo shit I don't even want to think about, so peace out. I'm pretty sure that's a direct quote from Newton, but let me know in the comments if I got it wrong. Spooky action at a distance, they call it. And when science delved in and looked even closer at these billiard balls that weren't actually touching each other, the billiard balls themselves disappeared. Science can't find anything solid. In fact, we can't find anything. As far as we can tell, there are only relations. Not even relations between things, because we can't find any independent things. Just relations. Most people still haven't gotten this memo from fundamental physics. The term physical no longer means what it used to mean in science. Everything you see, you, me, the rocks, the trees, the air, the bees, the rivers, and the seas, are all ultimately composed of nothing more than a field of relational vibrations and excitations and waves. Vibrations and excitations and waves of what? We don't know. Just vibrations and excitations and waves. Alright? So the current physical theory of everything is quite literally the lyrics of a Beach Boys song that was written on an acid trip. It's like, hey scientists, what is everything made of? Strawberry fields forever? We're still working on it. We've just discovered this thing called dark energy. It's like 70% of the universe. Dark, by the way, refers to how in the dark we are about it. We'll get back to you. In the meantime, can we offer you a very accurate prediction? Yes, science, you can offer me a very accurate prediction. And that's awesome, but that's all you can offer me, so don't get it twisted. The rigidity of everything you touch can't be found in physics. But it's right there in your experience. You experience rigid. When you knock on a piece of wood with your knuckles, nothing is actually making contact with anything according to physics. But it sure as hell does in your experience. Your knuckles contact the wood. There's no such thing as wet in physics, but there sure is wet in your experience. So what's real to you? Your experience of things being wet and your knuckles making contact with wood? Or the physics where nothing is wet and nothing is making contact with anything? Today, the term physical in science can only refer to measurements we can make of these relational vibrations and excitations. There is no stuff unless by stuff you mean measurements we can make of these relational vibrations and excitations. Now, these vibrations and excitations have patterns when we measure them, and these patterns are very useful for prediction. But the cause of these vibration and excitation patterns remains absent from the data. It remains spooky action at a distance. And so the supposition of there even being an external mind-independent cause of these vibration and excitation patterns may just be an assumption caused by the bewitchment of our intelligence by means of language, is what I'm saying. Okay now, I understand why you may be having difficulty wrapping your head around this whole idea of questioning the existence of the external objective world. I mean, it seems pretty intuitive that there is an external objective world, right? Well, that was always my intuition, that's for sure. And now? I just want you to examine how much of a role our language may be playing in that intuition. And I also want you to notice just how not in evidence this external objective world is. And perhaps most importantly, how incoherent as a concept it is. What does it even mean to speak about something from no point of view? Can you actually wrap your mind around that concept? How can you even think about, let alone refer to, something from no point of view? So this whole subject-object element of our language may be an intelligence-bewitching element of our language. Based on what science is telling us, it seems like subject harmonic may be a more appropriate perspective to take. But let me be extra clear here. I'm not saying that the world you experience is not real. I'm definitely not saying that the world you experience is an illusion. Precisely the opposite. I'm saying that the world you experience is real. That's what real is. Your experience of the world. That's what is in evidence from your first-person perspective. So that's what's real to you. Rocks really are hard, and water really is wet. That's what you mean when you use the word really. So this is not a metaphysical argument, it's a linguistic argument. It is incoherent to use the word real to refer to something that cannot be referred to because referring is from a perspective, and the thing you are referring to supposedly exists from no perspective at all. And here's the kicker. If we posit that there is an external objective world that we cannot access and therefore do not experience, and we call that reality, this means that your experience is not reality. Your experience becomes a mere representation of reality in your mind. This was famously Immanuel Kant's view. The world you experience is only a representation of the real world in itself, which we have no access to, because you can't handle the truth, I guess. This is also the idea behind Plato's cave, and it's also the general scientific supposition of this thing called mind-independent matter, the external objective world. This accusation that your experience is not real is called representationalism in philosophy of mind. Poke 'em in the eye, I say. Sorry, flick 'em in the ear. Because representationalism is a non-explanatory theory. It predicts nothing, so it explains nothing. Using the word real to refer to something that is not experienced ever, that is supposed without warrant, is bad philosophy. You use the word real to refer to the world that you do experience, not to some theoretical external world that you have never and will never experience. That's how you use the word real, and that's how you should use the word real. And the incoherentness of this external objective world supposition is revealed by the supposedly strange results we get from quantum physics. You've all heard the news. Quantum physics is very strange. The results of quantum physics experiments are surprising and radically counterintuitive according to most physicists. Well, that makes sense if you are starting with the presupposition of there being an external objective thing that quantum physics experiments are examining. The results are definitely counterintuitive with that presupposition. But the weird quantum physics results aren't weird at all if what quantum experiments are actually examining and bitifying is experience itself. That is what the results of quantum physics experiments seem to be telling us. If experience has no substrate, if experience is all there is, then of course quantum experiments keep indicating that things don't seem to exist until they are experienced. Quantum physics results aren't weird. You're weird for thinking they're weird. You're weird for assuming the existence of an external objective world that is not evident, not explanatory, and not even coherent to suppose. It's funny, most people think that the mystical thinking is to believe something like, all there is experience, man. But experience is what is most clearly in evidence. Experience is the most obviously real thing. Love, pain, delicious, wet, scary, impressive, cold, dry, compassion, stinky, spicy. None of these things exist in the supposed real external objective world, or in physics. These are all things that exist only in your experience. They are the only thing that is actually in evidence. Experience is evidence. Experience is the only evidence. What is not in evidence is any external cause to these experiences. The external cause is presumed, supposed, without warrant. The real mystical supposition is making reference to a non-experienced external objective world that is nowhere to be seen in any scientific experiment ever. Science can't be telling us about an external objective thing because you can't tell anyone anything from no point of view. And the findings of science are from a point of view. All of them. Don't get me wrong, scientists try as hard as they can to make their experiments and equations from no point of view, from an objective point of view. This is the primary goal of scientists. But they ultimately fail to achieve this goal in every case because the task is impossible. And they know this now. Scientific findings are all ultimately experienced by people from a classical point of view. Here you can reference what they call the problem of multiple observers. And you can also look at the Wigner's friend thought experiment. But it's important to point out here that none of this is a knock on science. It's a knock on bad philosophy of science. Science itself is explanatory, but not because it describes an external objective world. Science is explanatory because it reveals patterns of experience that predict the outcome of future experiences with high probability. That's what it means to be explanatory. It is that revelation of predictable patterns of experience that is useful to us, instrumental. It is that predictive power that we value and want from science. We don't actually look to science for more than that. The prediction is explanatory, useful. It's what we asked you for. The reference to an external objective world is not explanatory, not useful. It makes no predictions. It is superfluous. Worse than superfluous. It is confounding to suppose. So let's wrap up philosophy of science, shall we? Science finds patterns in our experience that predict the outcome of future events in our experience with such extremely high probability, we can do engineering and make medicine and build skyscrapers and roller coasters and spaceships. That's what science does. That is the demarcation point between science and not science. Does it discover patterns in our experience that predict future experiences with extremely high probability? Then it's science. Does it not do that? Then it's not science. Any further supposition that science is describing an external objective world is unwarranted mystical mumbo-jumbo. And it's not explanatory. It adds nothing to the story. Actually, what it adds to the story is the unjustified accusation that your experience is a mirage. It dethrones your experience from being what is real. It condemns you to Plato's cave. We make our medicine and build our airplanes with faith in the probabilistic predictions, not with faith in the existence of an external objective world. We are gamblers, not swamis. Very good gamblers, by the way. But this is not unique to humans. Being really good gamblers is how it seems to be for all animals, probably all life. And so science is not the only source of this future-predicting information that we seek. We were future-predicting gamblers long before science came along. And even today, science is not there to help you with all situations. I sometimes need to predict what my wife's reaction will be to a dark but very funny joke that's on the tip of my tongue. I need to know how the rest of my evening is going to go if I let this dark, yes, but very funny joke fly out my mouth. And science is no help with this prediction. Or is it? What I end up resorting to is not far removed from scientific methodology. I can only resort to examining past results of previous dark joke-telling experiments, we could call them. Some of these dark joke-telling experiences got very positive results, while others exploded like the Space Shuttle Challenger. So science is just an intensification and formalization of what we naturally do as a living creature. We are pattern-noticing, probability-predicting gamblers. More specifically, we are Bayesian probability-predicting gamblers. All life seems to be Bayesian probability-predicting gamblers. Good ones. Bayesian refers to a particular style of probability prediction. It was first articulated by a philosopher and statistician named Thomas Bayes, and it seems to match our natural reasoning faculties. Consider an eagle out on a mission to find food for its baby eaglets, and it spots a fish and begins its descent. As it gets closer and closer, the eagle is not aiming for where the fish is now. It's aiming for where it predicts the fish will be when it gets there. This includes the last-minute movement it expects the fish to make when the fish spots the shadow of the approaching eagle. And this prediction will be based on patterns that the eagle noticed during its previous fishing expeditions. And so this eagle will have a natural Bayesian-style prior belief about what fish do. And that credence will update immediately following the successful or unsuccessful completion of this mission. And all of life, it seems, whether you're an eagle or a tree or a human, is an endless series of these kind of Bayesian gambles based on prior beliefs that get updated with every win or loss. And if you think that sounds like a meaningless life, you may not be aware of how exciting gambling is. A roller coaster ride is not meaningless because you're not the one driving. Quite the opposite. It's a ride, man. An exciting ride. Throw your hands up and go, wee! To put it in Taoist terms, the way cannot be meaningless. The way is imbued with meaning. What's interesting to me is that this natural Bayesian betting idea coheres perfectly with what I think, of course, is the most sensible interpretation of quantum mechanics. It's called cubism, which is short for quantum Bayesianism. It says that quantum mechanics is basically a Bayesian-style betting handbook for subjective agents like ourselves. Cubism is a legit theory of quantum mechanics, although it is still considered to be quite a fringe theory. However, I'm betting on this horse coming from the clouds and crossing the finish line ahead of the other horses. That's my prediction. So what does all this mean? Does science tell us about reality or not? Well, let's work this out OLP style, shall we? The question, does science tell us what is real, is one of those pseudo-questions I was talking about earlier, which means it is a question that is answered by the definition of the terms being used in the question. So if you define the word reality as referring to a mind-independent external objective world, then no, science cannot possibly be telling us about that because science is from a mind-dependent point of view. But if you define the word reality as referring to your experience, and you define the word science as a process that discovers probabilistically predictable patterns of experience, then yes, of course, science tells us about reality. Science tells us about reality if you get the philosophy right. And by getting the philosophy right, I mean you find the meanings of those words you are using by looking at how the people use those words. Scientists don't decide what those words mean. Philosophers don't decide what those words mean. The people do. The convention does. Because the people are the inventors of language, and the daily reinventors of language, and the users of language. They are the experts on what the words they invented mean. Ask them what they mean. They'll tell you. With clarity. Water really is wet. For reals. Here's one of Wittgenstein's most famous quotes. What can be said at all can be said clearly. Hear, hear, I say. I like to call this local yokel wisdom. It's not the local yokels who need to ask philosophers what is real and what exists. It's the philosophers who need to ask the local yokels what is real and what exists. Ask any local yokel what exists, and they will answer you clearly and without hesitation. And they'll get it right. Imagine a philosopher approaches a local yokel outside of a bar and says, "Excuse me, local yokel, can you tell me what exists and how we know what exists?" The yokel would probably look down and pick up a rock and say something like, "Well, if I were to crack you in the head with this rock, you would then know that me and the rock and the blood trickling down your face all exist." And with that, the yokel will have clearly answered this question that philosophers and scientists are still trying to logically analyze. The yokel's answer? If it affects you, it exists, and that's how you know it exists. And that's the answer. Thanks, yokel. The wise philosopher does not provide definitions of terms. The wise philosopher points out who you really need to ask for those definitions. And yes, when we do that, I think we do get a definition of exists and real and science that makes it true to say that science does indeed tell us what is real and what exists. Science predicts that you will indeed experience a bloody laceration if a rock strikes you in the skull with a certain level of force. And these are postmodern definitions of real and exist and knowledge. because they were derived from the people's conventional use of the terms, and not from an unwarrantedly supposed external objective truth-maker. Modernism was based on the supposition that there is indeed an external objective world, and that external world that our language supposedly refers to is the truth-maker. And this position eventually became untenable. And so we did need a new truth-maker because the old truth-maker was never anywhere to be found in the first place. Inaccessible at best, and non-explanatory anyway. We needed a new postmodern truth-maker that we do actually see, that is actually accessible, and that is actually explanatory. And this is where I think that the old-school OLP philosophers let us down by not finishing the job. They didn't follow Wittgenstein's idea through to its logical conclusion. They left this new postmodern definition of truth way too vague. We can actually get more specific about what truth is with the meaning is use theory of language. We can actually pinpoint useful how. People do not use the word true to refer to usefulness of any kind. They mean useful for predicting the outcomes of future experiences, future actions. Useful specifically for that. And this retains truth as an empirical matter, not relativized. Regardless of our relative goals, we all need and use truth in the same instrumental way, to predict the outcome of events. When people use the word true, they're declaring extreme confidence in their prediction of a future outcome. And the future decides after the fact if their prediction was the actual truth or not. The future is the truth maker. So we never know the actual truth in the moment. Only future outcomes will reveal the actual truth. Until then, we have the incredibly high probability predictions we can make by carefully observing regularity in patterns of experience, like we do with science, for example. And like we do when we are just paying attention to what makes our friends and family tick, for another example. The new truth maker is the future, and your beliefs are the most reliable prediction of the future that you have available to you. And the more reliable your beliefs, the more likely you are to refer to them as knowledge, or facts, or even true. But they are high probability predictions at best, until the future confirms their actual truth. So I'm saying these definitions are what you find when you carefully employ the meaning is use theory of language. And so they are postmodern definitions, and they do not relativize truth. They do not relativize knowledge, facts, cause, explanation. But wait. Hold the phone. Why do we need this meaning is use theory of language to know what words mean? Isn't there a dictionary that tells us what words mean? I'm so glad you asked that question. Good timing. Yes, there is. So let's take a little detour down Dictionary Road and see how we fare with the word truth, for example. Here's what the dictionary says. Truth, the body of real things. Facts, actuality. Okay, I guess we'll have to look up the words real and facts and actuality. Let's start with real. Real, existing in fact. Okay, there's the word fact again, but let's look up this new word exist. Exist, to have actual being. Be real. Okay, there's the words actual and real again, but let's look up this new word being. Being, to exist actually or in the world of fact. Okay, so being means to exist actually, and exist means to have actual being. Got it. Okay, the word actual seems crucial here, so let's look that up. Actual, existing in fact or reality. Oh my god. Okay, so the word fact keeps coming up, and we haven't looked that up yet. So let's look up fact. Fact, something demonstrated to exist or known to have existed. What the So fact refers to exist, which refers back to being, which refers to real, which refers back to fact again. Wait, here's another definition of fact that has a new word. Fact, knowledge or information based on real occurrences. Okay, there's the word real again, but let's look up this new word, knowledge. Knowledge, the state or fact of knowing. Knowing, Possessing knowledge, information, or understanding. Okay, there's another word that has come up twice now. Information. Let's look up information. Information. Knowledge or facts learned. Okay, what the actual, man? All of these words refer back to each other in an impossible web of circularity. This is definition by synonym. It seems like we don't have definitions for any of these words, we just have other words for them. If they all refer to each other, they must mean one same thing. But what is that thing? The dictionary is no help in answering the question, what is truth? What exists? What is knowledge? What is real? What is a fact? What is information? They all refer back to each other. This is because the dictionary definitions of all of these philosophical trouble words comes by way of old-school philosophy that treats words as though they refer to an external objective world. So of course we don't have actual definitions for these words because we don't have access to an external objective world, if such a thing existed or was even a coherent supposition. And that's why all of these words in the dictionary can only refer back to each other in an impossible web of circularity. And so that's why we need the meaning is use theory of language if we want to know what these words actually mean. We need to find the meanings of these words in the usage of their inventors, because there is no other source for the meanings of these words. So let's go back and take another look at that original list of philosophical trouble words that I singled out earlier. Exist, being, cause, reality, truth, knowledge, wisdom, belief, fact, information, explanation, right, wrong, good, bad, moral, justice, virtue, meaning, free, will. It seems like at least half of the words on this list are the very words that came up in that impossible self-referencing web of circularity that we got when we tried to look up the word truth in the dictionary. Half of the words on this list of philosophical trouble words all refer to each other, which means they must all be referring to the same one thing. That is the one thing that the dictionary has right. All of these words are contextual synonyms for one another that refer to the same one thing. Exist, being, is, reality, cause, truth, knowledge, wisdom, belief, fact, actual, information, explanation. So what is that one same thing that these are all referring to? I'm going to make the case that the man they call the grandfather of pragmatism, Alexander Bain, nailed this question when he applied the meaning is use theory of language to the word belief. He noted that people use the word belief to refer to that upon which they are willing to act. That seemed to be how people were using the word belief, as a prerequisite for action. Beliefs have a pragmatic purpose. They are that upon which we are willing to act. We use them to inform and guide our actions. So, if belief is that upon which you are willing to act, what about all of those other is words? Do they all mean the same thing? Here's how I think that plays out. Belief isn't a complete concept. There's no such thing as just belief. It's always belief about something. And here's where some of those other words come in. You are willing to act on your belief about what exists, about what is real, about what is a fact, belief about what is the cause, belief about what is. And you can have varying levels of confidence in your belief about what is. And that is where the rest of the words on that list come in. It seems that we use the terms knowledge and facts and explanation to refer to the beliefs that we have the highest level of confidence in. And it seems like we use the words actual and true to refer to the final verdict of the truthmaker, the future, the outcome of the prediction. So it's like, I'd bet $100 on a run-of-the-mill belief. And I'd bet like $1,000 on some facts, or some information, or an explanation. And I'd bet my house on knowledge of the cause. And I would bet my life on knowing the truth. And the betting window is closed, of course, by the time I find out the actual truth. I think it's something like that. So we've replaced the old modernist truthmaker, which was the external objective world that we have no evidence for, no access to, no coherent definition of, and is non-explanatory. Somehow this was once seen as a viable truthmaker, the one we are afraid to lose, that is no loss at all, and we've replaced it with the future as the truthmaker. So it is the future and not an external objective world that confirms the truth of our beliefs, our predictions. Our knowledge, our facts, our explanation of what exists, what is real, what is the cause, these are all expressions of our best, most reliable predictions of the outcome of future events. And so they are that upon which we are willing to act because we act on predictions. We bet, and the future confirms if our bet pays off or not. So here we have a postmodern truthmaker that is not relativized. Postmodern because it derives its meaning of the word true by looking inward at how people actually use the word true. And not relativized because the future doesn't play favorites. Regardless of who you are or what your goals and desires are, we all desire and use truth for the same instrumental purpose, to predict the outcome of future events. The truth about gunpowder is, it burns really fast. That's the warranted prediction. This is true whether your desire is to make weapons of war, or to build a railway, or to make sparklers for children's birthday parties. E equals mc squared is true whether your goal is to power a hospital or to make atom bombs. So it seems like I've used OLP here to present a non-relativized, postmodern definition of truth. Real, exist, being, fact, knowledge, actual, information, explanation, cause. The is words. They are all used in reference to the probabilistically predictable patterns of experience that we are willing to act on. But of course I cannot have shown that quite yet, because is does not stand alone. Is all intertwined with ought to be. So we cannot fully articulate a theory about what is until we have examined ought to be. So I pointed out that half of the words on this list of philosophical trouble words all refer to one thing that I'm putting under the umbrella term is. And it looks to me like the rest of the words on this list of philosophical trouble words also all refer to another one thing that I'm going to put under the umbrella ought to be. Right, wrong, good, bad, moral, ethical, desire, value, justice, virtue, meaning, free, will. I won't make us detour down dictionary road again to show you what you probably already know is going to be the case. Here's the Cliff Notes. Moral means ethical, which means right, which means good, which means desired. And so good is just, desired, virtuous, moral. And bad is wrong, unjust, immoral, undesired, and vicious. Got that? So just like the is words, when you consult the dictionary, all of these ought to be words also all refer back to each other in an impossible web of circularity. And so you also come away from the dictionary not knowing what the one thing is that they all refer to. And so it's going to have to be OLP to the rescue again. Because these words also do not get their meaning from some inaccessible external realm. And in the dictionary, they are defined only by synonym. They refer only to each other. So there is no source for the meanings of these words other than in the conventional use of their users. They come by their meaning the same way that the words bachelor and sister and table and month come by their definitions, by convention. The meanings of these words should no more be the subject of inexhaustible debate than the meaning of the word sister. So let's find out what the ought to be words are all referring to OLP style, shall we? So we're looking for how these ought to be words are most commonly used by people. I noted that the is words are most commonly used by people to refer to that upon which they are willing to act, the noticeable patterns of experience that predict with high probability. But this is an incomplete theory until I show how a prediction of the outcome of events leads to action. How do you go from is to ought? And of course the answer is, as Hume pointed out, because you have a goal. You have passions. You want. You want something in the future. This completes the equation. Desired goal plus prediction of event outcomes prescribes action. So they're right when they say you cannot derive ought from is, unless you're a human, and then of course you can and should derive ought from is. A prediction of the outcome of events prescribes actions that will help you achieve your goal, this thing that you want in the future, this thing that you value, that you desire, that you kind of insist on having. Like the eagle wants, values, desires, kind of insists on having a meal for itself and its eaglets. And the eagle relies on its own is, its prediction of what fish do, in order to achieve its goal. The eagle derives ought from is. But was catching the fish the goal? Not quite. Catching the fish is what philosophers would call the proximate goal. The proximate goal is a step goal, a means to the end goal, the ultimate goal. Catching the fish is a means to the end goal of eating the fish and feeding its eaglets. But wait, is eating the fish and feeding its eaglets the end goal, the ultimate goal, or another proximate goal? What makes it a goal for the eagle to eat and to feed its eaglets? It's probably true that when the eagle is eating the fish and feeding its eaglets, it feels very good to be the eagle. It's certainly true that when human parents are eating and feeding their children, it feels very good to be them. And more importantly, if they were struggling to feed their children and themselves, it would feel very, very bad to be them. So the feeding itself is not the end goal. The feeding itself was the last proximate goal to the ultimate end goal of not suffering, which is the same thing as feeling good. Not suffering feels very, very good. Earlier I dropped kind of a major philosophy bomb and then skipped right past it. It's time to return to it. I was speaking about the most salient element of our experience, what philosophers call the good-bad valence spectrum. It is also referred to as hedonic tone. At any given moment in time, it can feel very, very good to be you, or it can feel very, very bad to be you, and it can feel all points in between. And you not only have a preference for feeling good over bad, you kind of insist on it. It quite literally moves you. And it is this goal of feeling good not bad that prediction utility helps you to achieve. The bomb I dropped was my contention that the only coherent definition of the word good is in reference to the way you prefer to feel and kind of insist on feeling. And the only coherent definition of the word bad is in reference to the way you most definitely do not want to feel and kind of insist on not feeling. This, I think, is the OLP definition of good and bad that we get when we look at how people use those terms. They are always referring to positive or negative valence, either directly or indirectly. I think any other definition you come up with will reduce to this definition. Because once you remove hedonic tone from the definition of good, you're left only with that circular question-begging definition of good that you get from the dictionary. But it is anathema in modern moral philosophy to suggest that good and bad, and therefore right and wrong, only refer to what you personally like and don't like, or want and don't want. Good and bad cannot refer only to personal positive valence seeking. That would undercut moral responsibility, so that's why it can't be. This is the same kind of scary idea as the relativization of truth. And so it makes sense that most people would find this idea troublesome upon hearing it articulated. But upon closer examination, it's not scary at all. And closer examination is what philosophers are supposed to be up to. So in my opinion, moral philosophers have no excuse for making this particular error. And boy, do they. It is understandable that good people, the best people, kind-hearted, warm, loving, compassionate people tend to have a very strong aversion to this idea that humans are driven by this very simple personal positive valence-seeking goal. We don't like it because it sounds selfish, and we don't like selfishness, nor should we like selfishness. And we also don't like this personal positive valence-seeking definition of good, because it makes it sound like we are just meat robots with no free will or moral responsibility. And I get this. I don't like selfishness, and I don't want to think of myself as just a meat robot. But notice that this aversion to the idea that we are driven by personal positive valence-seeking is a prime example of it. The instinctive aversion to it is confirmation of it. We experience negative valence when thinking about humans being selfish, and positive valence at the thought of the opposite, of people being more sharing and caring. And it is this fact that we get personal positive valence from the idea of sharing and caring that makes it unnecessary to have an aversion to the idea that we are driven by personal positive valence seeking. It's an irrational aversion because sharing and caring produces the kind of personal positive valence that we seek. Sharing and caring is wise self-interest, enlightened self-interest, in social animals like us. This is where we part ways with the eagles. Eagles are not a social species, so while they feel good when feeding themselves and their eaglets, they do not share and care outside of their nuclear family at all because they do not get positive valence for doing so. They even stop sharing and caring for their children once they become self-sufficient. They stop getting positive valence by feeding their children, and so they stop feeding and taking care of their children. Now we can talk about a level of sociality that is far deeper than that of the eagle, but still nowhere close to us humans. Compared to eagles, wolves are considered to be a very social animal. They run in packs, hunt in packs, and shelter in packs. They don't stick to only sharing and caring with their nuclear kin, so we can assume that wolves do get some personal positive valence, some feel-good, by sharing and caring with their non-kin packmates, but only to a point. Wolves are at an in-between stage of socialization. They cooperate to an extent, but they are still each of them individually self-sufficient. Sometimes a wolf loses its pack, or gets kicked out of its pack, and becomes a lone wolf. But a lone wolf can still survive. Evolutionarily speaking, wolves remain self-sufficient animals. Humans, on the other hand, are not. Unlike a lone wolf, a lone human cannot survive. A lone human is not even a thing. The socialization of our species has progressed to the point where we are no longer self-sufficient. We have become fully reliant on our group, our tribe, our culture. No group, no you. The benefit, of course, is the exponential fitness-gaining efficiency of group cooperation by specialized contribution. But the trade-off for this huge fitness-gaining advantage, this division into specialized contribution, was losing the ability to survive alone. If you are an expert survivalist, you can last alone in the woods for a little while. Maybe the best survivalist could pull off a year of totally alone living, but not without some tools from our culture. And they would with certainty go insane without any human contact or interaction. Even if they could keep themselves fed and sheltered, they would eventually die from delirious insanity. Lone wolves don't go insane. Lone humans do. Lone humans go insane and die in short order. So when it comes to humans, there really is no such thing as just an individual. There are only individual members of a collective. Because no group, no you. The group completes you, and you complete the group. Individuals need the collective, and the collective needs individuals. And in our human species, the collective thrives by having unique specialist individuals. To speak of individualism versus collectivism as a dichotomy, where one is better than the other, is a woefully naive take. The way in which nature creates sociality in species seems to be by way of adding personal positive valence rewards to actions that have proven to increase personal fitness by way of social cooperation. So doing nice things for others has been a winning strategy for personal fitness. So doing nice things for others gets added to the personal positive valence reward system. It's a win-win situation. This is the real invisible hand, nature's invisible hand. And it doesn't take away from it feeling so damn good to know the pragmatic evolutionary reason why it feels so damn good. It's just wonderful that it feels wonderful to make others feel wonderful. Positive valence is what we are describing when we use the words meaning, bliss, awe, purpose, fulfillment, contentment, satisfaction. We want all of these feelings because they feel really, really good. They are positive valence. That's what it means to be drawn to them. Most importantly, they are one and the same thing as the absence of suffering. Moments of bliss are extremely rare total absences of any noticeable suffering. When you have an excruciating throbbing toothache and it throbs off for a minute, that feeling of it backing off almost completely, even if only for a moment, is euphoric. And yet, if you came to this state from the opposite direction, it would not be euphoric. It would be suffering. So this personal positive valence-seeking behavior is far more about the avoidance of suffering than the seeking of pleasure. When you give money to a homeless person on the street, for example, it is to quell your own suffering at having encountered them. And the quelling of that suffering feels great. Aristotle knew what time it was on this. He said, "The aim of the wise is not to secure pleasure, but to avoid pain." This is great news because it's a little less embarrassing to be a diva who insists on not suffering than a diva who insists on bliss, even though they are the same thing. Good is not bad, and not bad is good. Your goal in life is to feel good, not bad, and that is good, not bad. Aristotle called it Eudaemonia or Eudaemonia, take your pick. Feeling all the pleasures. The maximum absence of suffering, which equates to the maximum amount of feel-good. Aristotle said, Eudaemonia is the meaning and purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. He was endorsing personal positive valence-seeking, but he was not endorsing selfishness. Aristotle knew that sharing and caring was the wisest path to both personal and public eudaimonia. And Aristotle knew that the path to personal eudaimonia, the meaning of life, was best achieved not only by sharing, but by sharing in a particular way, by fulfilling your purpose. Aristotle was all about purpose, teleology. Aristotle believed you have a purpose, and I believe you have a purpose. I am an Aristotelian teleologist. Socrates also believed you have a purpose, and that justice, the good, the right, was you fulfilling your purpose, and being allowed to fulfill your purpose. The purpose that they were both referring to is one that they observed and intuited. It seemed clear to them that nature designed each of us a specialist, an artist, particularly talented at one very useful to the tribe skill, or art as they called it. They could see the evidence for this specialized purpose or talent in human nature clear as day, long before Darwin discovered the natural process that explains it. The evolution of sociality in species creates specialist division of labor, specialist contributors to the collective. I think that for people who want to know what the meaning of life is, what they are actually yearning for is to know their purpose in life, so they can take steps to fulfill their purpose, because they instinctively know that the greatest feeling ever, eudaimonia, awaits them on the other side of fulfilling their purpose. And that is why they desperately want to know their purpose, the meaning of life. I agree with Aristotle that your purpose is to discover the specialized talent that nature bestowed upon you, that thing that you are better at than most, if not everyone in the tribe. It comes stock with standard issue humans. You get a thing that you are better at than most, if not all other humans. And it could be engineering, or teaching, or parenting. or being a really good friend who organizes and brings people together. We need engineers, of course, but what good are they without the life of the party? And those two seldom come in the same package. Sorry, engineers. I have no doubt that that was totally unfair, but I'm keeping it in for the cheap laugh. Anyway, Aristotle would say that the path to eudaemonia, the meaning of life, your purpose, is to find that thing that nature made you a specialist at. That thing that you do better than most, if not all. And then apply that special talent to improving the lives of everyone around you. Everyone wants to fulfill their purpose, and the rest of us want them to do that. Because their purpose is to benefit us in their special way. People love doing what they are particularly and uniquely good at, especially in a way that lights up the lives of others. And again, we don't just need technical problem solvers and craftspeople. We also need good parents and good friends, good teachers, artists, or just that soothing presence and sober voice. We need all hands voluntarily on the right deck and no hands involuntarily on the wrong deck. And that's all we need. That's what Socrates calls justice and what Aristotle calls eudaemonia. So there's the meaning of life that I promised. It's just Socratic justice and Aristotelian eudaimonist teleology with a not even necessary update from Darwin, if you like. So what is ought to be according to my OLP? Ought to be is an attitude, an insistence that you have about the future. The future ought to be such that you feel good, not bad. And oh boy, does using your special talent to light up the lives of others ever make you feel good, not bad. It is the surest path to eudaemonia. And not only is that okay, it is the meaning of life, according to Aristotle, and me. But again, just like people fear the relativization of truth, they also fear the relativization of morality. And they fear that the meaning is use theory of language does both. Truth can't be just what is useful, and morality can't just be about your own personal desire to feel good, not bad. These fears are understandable. We are social beings, and we do kind of need to all agree on what is and what ought to be if we're going to get along and work together. But in both cases, the feared relativization does not occur. I think I have shown that the meaning is use theory of language does not relativize truth. It does not relativize the is words. And now I aim to show that this personal positive valence-seeking definition of ought to be, which I derive by employing the meaning is use theory of language, does not relativize morality. It does define good and bad by way of subjective valence, but in doing so, it does make morality an empirical matter, and so not relativized. Now I do need to talk quickly about the word altruism, which is synonymous with the word selfless. In biology, the word altruism is used to refer to an action that an organism takes to benefit another organism at the cost of its own fitness. That is to say, the action that they take to benefit others threatens or jeopardizes their own survival. A truly selfless act. But such acts are actually hard to find in nature, even in an extremely social species like humans. When examined more closely, actions that appear to be fitness-costing turn out to be fitness-increasing actions. Say I offer to help my neighbor build their garage, and it costs me energy, and maybe a strained back, and some slivers in my hand that might get infected, and some wear and tear on my tools. But I gain very valuable favor, and status, and with a whole lot of feel-good. And maybe my neighbor's sister catches a glimpse of my glistening biceps and skills, and I end up falling in love and marrying her. Now, the most popular and widely accepted modern moral theories would frame my offer to help my neighbor build their garage as altruistic or selfless behavior. And they would suggest that it is moral for that reason. So behavior that is clearly fitness gaining and also feels so damn good precisely because it is fitness gaining, they would label this fitness gaining behavior as selfless altruistic behavior. This makes no sense. This is an inexcusable misfire made by supposedly the greatest moral philosophers in history. I'm talking about deontology and utilitarianism. Okay, so here's my bomb. The association of morality with altruistic or selfless behavior is the error in moral philosophy. And correcting this error dissolves the philosophical moral pseudo-problems. We don't ever actually need anyone to lose fitness for us, and so we have no moral right to ask for it or demand it, and we are doomed to mispredict our fellow humans if we expect it. This is why if you examine the most common and long-standing moral aphorisms, you'll find that they all ultimately appeal to self-interest. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The kind of behavior that we want and need from other humans is all personal fitness-gaining behavior. Wise self-interest. Sharing and caring is personal fitness-gaining and positive valence-producing behavior. Socrates is perhaps most famous for asking questions only. He very rarely made assertions. And one of the very few ideas he felt confident enough to assert was one that he asserted over and over. Virtue equals wisdom. Virtue and wisdom are one and the same. Nailed it. Morality equals wise self-interest. Enlightened self-interest. We don't need people to be selfless, and thank God for that, because they're not. Thanks to nature's design, the real invisible hand, we only need people engaging in wise self-interest, personal positive valence seeking. The word selfish does not mean the same thing as self-interest. The word selfish is a pejorative, an insult, that we created to point to a type of behavior we do not like, that we consider wrong. But it's not actually the self-interest or the personal positive valence-seeking part of the behavior that we are offended by. Nobody has a problem with somebody volunteering at the soup kitchen because it makes them feel good. Well, Immanuel Kant would, but he was a true loon on this subject. Most of us would not be bothered at all to hear that someone is volunteering at the soup kitchen because they discovered that it brings meaning into their life. We don't call these people selfish for seeking personal positive valence. The behavior that we don't like, that we pejoratively call selfish, is unwise self-interest, unwise positive valence seeking. We are offended at people being unwise in their self-interest. Here's a quote, I think, from Marcus Aurelius. If a man would only learn to know himself, he would never act unjustly, for he would perceive that injustice injures himself, not others. Socrates also said, no one knowingly does wrong. All virtue is wisdom, all vice is ignorance. Now here's an extremely important point. What I just said works for like 99% of us. When most people act like selfish idiots, they are being ignorant idiots. They are being unwise in their self-interest. But there are an anomalous, very roughly around 1% of humans, who are not being unwise when they act in that selfish, abhorrent way, because they would not actually be happier by sharing and caring. They are psychopaths, and I'm using the term clinically here. They have a pathology of the psyche. A pathology is an abnormal brain condition with negative consequences, as opposed to an abnormal brain condition with positive consequences, like Einstein's abnormal brain condition. An anomalous percentage of the human population are missing the normal human capacity to feel empathy, sympathy, compassion, kindness, caring, etc. And more importantly, they do not suffer at all when they witness the suffering of others. It doesn't bother them a bit. And many of them actually get positive valence from seeing the suffering of others. Standard issue humans feel really good when they make other people feel happy, and they feel really bad when they make other people feel sad. Mainly because making people feel good is status raising, and making people feel bad is status lowering. And almost nothing feels better than raising your status, and almost nothing feels worse than lowering your status, for the standard issue human. But at just 1% of the human population of 8 billion, there are approximately 80 million total psychopaths running the earth. And I do mean running the earth. They tend to hold positions of power because of the kind of things that you need to do to gain and hold positions of power. And the ones who don't end up gaining positions of power tend to make the news in other horrific ways. And so this extreme minority of humans throws off everyone's perception of human nature. We look at all of the war and crime and pollution and we think, oh, humans. But that is not a fair assessment of humans. Humans do not suck. Don't get thrown by the psychopath factor, I call it. There's 80 million of them out there making the rest of us look bad. If you are a misanthrope, please stop being a misanthrope. You're making an error. And you are either self-exceptionalizing or self-loathing. And neither of those things is healthy for you or for anyone else, so just stop it. Don't make me flick you in the ear, misanthropes. And guess what? It's not the psychopath's fault. Don't fall into that trap. They are no more to blame for being psychopaths than autistic people are to blame for being autistic. It is irrational to hate psychopaths. But the good news is we don't need to hate them to prevent them from effing up our world. I'm going to bite the bullet here and admit that, in the view I'm articulating, it is not technically wrong for the psychopaths to be doing what they're doing, because they are just seeking positive valence like we are. But neither would it be wrong for us to protect ourselves from them by removing their freedom and ability to harm us. And we would be wise to do so as compassionately as we would deal with any other unfortunately necessary quarantine. The main point here is, do not be thrown by the particularly prominent, loud, and powerful, but anomalous psychopaths. Do not be thrown by the psychopath factor. 99% of us get off on being a hero to others. Personal positive valence seeking fully explains the most compassionate, seemingly altruistic behaviors you've ever seen. You can frame this view of morality negatively and think that it means we are just selfish meat robots. What it actually means is that we evolved to be a social creature via a personal positive valence reward system that makes us a creature that gets off on getting others off. And yes, that's a bit of a creepy sexual metaphor, but it's also quite literally true. That feeling that we all experience, that all choked up, brought to tears, tingle up the spine feeling you get when you are witness to or involved in an act of ultimate human compassion and kindness, loyalty, and love. That feeling that we all experience is an orgasm, complete with involuntary convulsions and an overwhelming transcendent sense of fulfillment and contentment. And it makes sense that a species with such a high degree of sociality like ourselves would experience this type 2 orgasm, I call it. All animals have the type 1 orgasm, that max positive valence experience that you get rewarded with when you've just completed the evolutionary task of procreation, or when you fool your body into believing you've done so anyway. That orgasmic reward, of course, makes sense in all animals. But in a highly social species like ourselves, we get this second type 2 orgasm, when we are witness to or directly engaged in the kind of extreme compassionate caring behavior that adds exponential fitness and security to all of our lives. It's a brilliant design. Bonded cooperation yields exponential fitness gain, and so bonded cooperation behavior is rewarded with a rush of positive valence. That lump in the throat, brought to tears, tingle up the spine, transcendent, euphoric, social species type 2 orgasm that tells you, do more of this. Be involved in more of this. And again, this is the real invisible hand that drives people to be the kind of contributing cooperative tribe mates that we all desire and admire. Our admiration for them is their fetish. They need no other incentive. Morality is about correcting people's unwisdom in their personal positive valence seeking. This is both Socrates and Lao Tzu. Morality is not about demanding duty and expecting selfless behavior. Such a demand and expectation is an error, and will only ever lead to erroneous predictions of human behavior, and bad prescriptions for human behavior. This view of morality that I'm outlining here is at serious odds with the most widely accepted views in modern moral philosophy, namely deontology and utilitarianism. I want to point out that these leading theories are flawed because they are guilty of the greatest philosophical sin, not knowing thyself, the human psyche. So in the case of deontology, the inexcusable mistake is believing that the human animal is capable of mandating upon itself a rule to always act such that you could rationally will your action to be a universal law. And in the case of utilitarianism, which is also deontology by the way, the mistake of utilitarianism is believing that the human animal is capable of mandating upon itself a rule to always act in a way that will achieve the greatest good for the greatest number. Both of these systems rely on a begging the question definition of moral as a duty to be selfless. It is absolutely stunning that these are the two most credible moral theories in philosophy today. They neither explain nor predict the human behavior that we see. And of course, they fail to affect moral behavior for the better because their demand is incompatible with human nature. What does explain and predict human behavior quite clearly is self-interest. Why do people do bad things? Self-interest. Why do people do good things? Self-interest. The only difference is the good things are wise self-interest and the bad things are unwise self-interest. Or psychopathy. Don't get thrown by the psychopath factor. Now check this out. This view does subjectivize morality, but it does not relativize morality. Wait, what? How much more relativized could you get than it being subjective? Because it can be both subjective and empirical. Remember how I claimed that applying the postmodern meaning is use theory of language to the word truth does not relativize truth because the people's conventional definition of the word truth is that upon which they are willing to act, which makes it subjective at that level, but the reason why they are willing to act on it to achieve their subjective goal is because it is a prediction of the future, and the future doesn't play favorites. Each individual is using it to achieve their subjective goal, but it has the same empirical function for everyone. It reliably predicts. So I'm now making the same claim about this personal positive valence-seeking or wise self-interest view of morality. So this view of morality, or ought to be, starts out with the empirical observation that humans by nature insist on feeling good not bad. This is not yet an ought to be judgment, this is still purely descriptive. This is the empirical claim. It predicts human behavior with extremely high probability. Ought to be is a fundamental attitude that the subject has. The insistence that the future ought to be such that I feel good not bad. And to achieve this goal, I need to act wisely. I need to reliably predict the outcome of events in my environment, my world, my universe, including, and most importantly, the outcome of possible actions I could take. And so with this description of what is the case, what I ought to do becomes an empirical matter. And the most salient feature of my environment that requires the most amount of prediction is other humans, who are also seeking personal positive valence, who also insist on feeling good not bad. I can take that to the bank. I'd be wise to count on that. And knowing this of each other, the path to both personal and public eudaemonia becomes an empirical matter, a wise negotiation. Virtue equals wisdom. In the Western tradition, Socrates is considered to be the first serious moral philosopher, and he nailed it right out of the gate, because it's not that complicated. Virtue equals wisdom. Series of footnotes indeed. And then along comes Aristotle, who finishes the job by intuiting nature's serendipitous creation. The exponential fitness-gaining miracle of specialized contribution in social species, driven by a teleological, positive valence reward system. Eudaemonia via fulfillment of your specialized purpose in life. The meaning of life. The beautiful, wonderful, serendipitous thing is that for 99% of us anyway, What makes us feel good not bad is having prestige in a successful collective, earning praise from our tribe with our specialized talent, being a hero to others. Everyone else is seeking their specialized purpose in this world so they can put a smile on your face with it and score themselves that type 2 orgasm of social species that comes with having fulfilled their purpose of earning prestige. The very first moral philosopher nailed it more than 2,000 years ago. You have got to be kidding me that today we have utilitarianism and deontology. These absolutely ridiculous moral theories make me think of George Orwell's famous line, "Some ideas are so stupid that only intellectuals will believe them." I'll put my Socrates and Aristotle and Lao Tzu up against your Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant any day of the week. But you don't have to take it from any great philosopher. You can also introspectively notice that you have never in your entire life let anyone else tell you what is right and wrong. You were born knowing what ought to be. You ought to feel good, not bad. That's why you came out of the womb crying. You weren't crying because you were sad. You were crying because you are a diva who was so rudely interrupted from your nap, your me time. You were chillin', and now you're illin', and you insist on knowing why. We all popped out into this world asking, WTF? Wait, did I just equate the question why with WTF? Are those two different questions, or are they the same question? Why questions are different from what questions, aren't they? Why questions aren't just asking about causality. Causality is like a science question, and science doesn't answer why questions. Why questions are special like that, aren't they? Something science can't answer? But wait, doesn't the answer to every why question begin with the word because? Be cause, as in, here be the cause? The question why is asking for causality. It's the very same question as what is the cause? WTF. Why equals what the actual F be the cause. The newborn diva wants to know why its me time was just so rudely interrupted, and it's looking for an answer that begins with the word because. Why am I illin'? I was chillin'. Why am I now illin'? What is the explanation? I demand the facts, the information. Give me the 411. I already know what ought to be. I don't need you to tell me that. I ought to feel way the hell better than my current state. I've got ought covered. I just need to know causality now, and I'll take it from there. Just the facts, ma'am. So if you thought that why questions are a different kind of question, separate and different from causality questions, they're not. Why questions are asking for just the facts, ma'am. Why questions are coming from someone who already knows what ought to be. This is why I like to say that OLP eats why questions for breakfast. Okay, I can't wrap up a theory of everything without talking about free will, so let's just touch on that quickly. Haha. Now we'll eventually do a whole chapter on this, but let's just go over a few of the ways you can talk about free will. I'll start with the quickest way you can deal with the question, do we have free will? If you're really short on time, you can just point out that the fail rate for New Year's resolutions is like 90%, and then you can drop mic and walk away. You have sufficiently answered the question. So that's if you're in a hurry. And this leads right into the next way that we can talk about free will. Because what the New Year's resolution fail rate exposes is not so much do you have free will, but how well do you know you? What the New Year's resolution fail rate reveals is that most people don't know themselves very well, and so they mispredict themselves. This is most likely because very roughly about 95% of you is not conscious you, and the roughly 5% of you that is conscious you is not driving the car. Obviously. Of course, the 95% unconscious you is driving the car. Conscious you doesn't even know how to drive the car. The manual is too big for conscious you to read, and the reaction time of conscious you is definitely not up to the task. At best, conscious you is sitting in the driver's seat giving direction suggestions, And sometimes unconscious you will take your suggestion if it feels like it. The more famous analogy is that of the rider on the elephant. Conscious you is the rider. Unconscious you is the elephant. And so you better get to know your elephant, because it's more you than conscious you. And some people get to know their elephant better than others. And so they predict their elephant's will better than others. And this allows them to work with their elephant better than others. And this in turn gives them more credibility and sway with their elephant. So that's another way to look at free will. But I am the ordinary language philosopher, so I'm supposed to approach the problem of free will by looking at how the people use the term free will, which I have done, and what I discovered is they don't. People don't use the term free will in their daily lives or in normal conversation. Philosophers and theologians use the term free will, and lawyers and judges sometimes use the term free will, but regular people don't, unless they have decided to engage in a discussion about philosophy or theology. So the term free will is not a term of the people. It wasn't born ground up. It is one of those rarer cases of a term that enters our lexicon top down, placed there by theologians originally, and then adopted by Western philosophers, and then by lawyers and judges. So the standard OLP method of finding the meanings of words by looking at how the people use them doesn't work with the term free will because the people don't use it. And it's important to note that this extremely contentious debate is just about this one term, free will. There are professional philosophers out there who take a position called free will skepticism. And none of these free will skeptic philosophers make the claim that humans don't make decisions and choices. And they all accept that there is a difference between doing something on purpose and doing something by accident. And there is a difference between being coerced externally and not being coerced. The free will skeptics only critique the term free will and the concept free will as this thing that you make your choices with. So nobody disputes that humans make choices. The actual term free will was invented by the Christian Church to solve a logical problem with their theology where a perfect loving God creates a creature in his own image that immediately falls from perfection, flips off its loving creator, and sets out to do all kinds of horrible things. There seems to be an obvious logical problem with that story, and the idea that God gave us free will fixes that problem. I mean, no it doesn't, but they say that it does. But if we look at the people's language that the people invented, we see something quite different than a belief in this thing called free will. Yes, people do say, I chose this, or I decided that, but they don't add, with my free will. They say, I chose this because, and I decided that because. If you ask people why they did something, they present causes for why they did it. Here's how the people actually talk. They say things like, it made me laugh. I fell in love. She made me cry. I was brought to tears. Something came over me. I was drawn to it. I was compelled to act. Fear came over me. I was struck by the urge, struck by the muse. I did that thing because of something else that happened before it. When asked why we chose this or decided that, we begin our answer with the word because, as in, my choice was caused by. So the people don't use this top-down injected term free will at all, but rather the people's language is filled with evidence that the people are well aware that they are driven, that they are a passenger on the elephant, riding the way. So the term free will is good for theologians, I guess. Philosophers should drop it because it's incoherent and non-explanatory, and so it's useless to even judges and lawyers. They don't have to ask, did you do this of your own free will? They can just ask, were you coerced? No need to invoke this term that the church invented to acquit God of responsibility for the sins of his creation. And then there's this group of philosophers called compatibilists, who are trying to save this church-invented term because they think that without the idea of free will, There is no basis for moral responsibility. But of course there is, and it's, you guessed it, wise self-interest. Moral behavior is brought about by wisdom. It is wise to be sharing and caring and kind and cooperative. Pro-social. It is in your best interest to be reliable. Responsibility isn't some external metaphysical force upon you. Responsibility is something that you can and should and will take on voluntarily because it is fitness gaining. It is a wise path to eudaemonia. And with that, I think we can begin to surmise this thingamajiggy. I opened by saying that philosophy is entirely about what is and what ought to be. So what is? What exists? What is real? What is true? What is knowledge? What is the cause? What is fact? What is the explanation, the information? What is? These are all contextual references to one thing, the most reliable prediction of the outcome of events that we have available to us. The is words are all in reference to the prediction utility that we act on. That is how we use and what we do with the is words. They are that upon which we are willing to act. That's is. And what is ought to be? You ought to feel good, not bad. You ought to achieve eudaemonia, your goal. And is predicts what actions you can take that will help you to achieve your goal, eudaemonia. And in my view, the wisest prediction, the wisest path to eudaemonia, is to find your special talent and use it to be a hero to others. And of course to advocate for a social order that allows everyone to do the same, voluntarily in their own special way. So there's what is and what ought to be. Am I the grand champion of philosophy? Well, I know you don't think that, but let me know what you do think in the comments. I mean, come on, I threw in the meaning of life for you, solved the free will question, finished philosophy of science once and for all. And if you were paying close attention, I also dissolved the hard problem of consciousness and the mind-body problem. We don't have a hard problem of consciousness. We have a hard problem of this thing called mind-independent matter. Clearly. Consciousness, or experience as I call it, is manifestly in evidence. On the other hand, this concept that bad philosophers of science call mind-independent matter is not in evidence. It is supposed, without warrant. Physics is a thing that emerges from experience, not the other way around. Is this idealism? I don't call it that. I think you could definitely call it immaterialism, but there's too many kinds of idealism out there that are definitely not this. So I'm just calling it an experience-first ontology for now. Something very similar to William James's radical empiricism. That's on the is side of things. On the ought side of things, you might ask if this view that I'm expressing is egoism or hedonism. And again, just like with the term idealism, I don't apply those labels to my view. I recognize the similarity with those theories, but I think that those labels are misleading, so I prefer to articulate my view in the way that I have. In general, what am I up to here? I'm trying to reboot the Socratic insight, virtue equals wisdom, Aristotelian insights like natural teleology and eudaemonia through purpose fulfillment as the meaning of life, which I think fits like a glove with the theory of evolution by natural selection. I'm declaring instrumentalism as the only sane philosophy of science, and I'm dumping all over materialism, scientific realism, formal logic, and modern-day moral theories like deontology and utilitarianism. And of course, I am coming to all of these conclusions by employing Wittgenstein's meaning is use theory of language, which does not relativize truth or morality as I employ it. Oh my god, pretty brash and cocky for a so-called fallibilist. But I am a fallibilist. It's a bonus to being a fallibilist that you get to assert your current beliefs confidently, partly because they are continuously scrutinized, but also because that is actually the best way to have them continuously scrutinized, is to assert them confidently and publicly. There are so many people out there who want to put me in my place right now, and that is awesome. Finding out that you're wrong is awesome, because now you're less wrong. So yeah, I just said all that stuff very confidently, and I didn't properly back it up or reference it. Yet. As I said at the beginning, this is a very broad, generalized overview of this so-called theory of everything that I currently have and can't seem to unhave. And again, maybe you can help me out with that. If I'm wrong, please help a brother out and correct me. This is what I want from you. Feedback, pushback, or even a good sound thrashing. Indeed, a good sound thrashing would be the most wonderful thing if a good sound thrashing is in order. But please, a friendly, civil, good sound thrashing. No need to go all ad hominem. By all means, be pithy, sarcastic, even brutal. But in a friendly fire way, right? Come on, guys. Please and thank you. And nuke that like button. I just made that up. I'm raising the stakes on the old smash that like button. Nuke it. And one last time, I take no credit for any of the ideas that I've just presented. I think this is probably a unique curation and configuration, just because it would be some crazy weird fluke if someone else had this exact compilation and configuration. But that is all that's original about it. There might be some new things under the sun, but I sure as hell didn't just present any of them here. And so I'm making this free and public domain. It's all yours. Have at her. Do with it what thou wilt. Use it like an ace, to put egg on my face. Whatever puts a smile on your face, and doesn't make you a big disgrace. Blast it into space, mix it with some bass, and do so with some grace. Now get on that case. Nah, it's not a race. Uh-oh, I'm starting to rhyme again. This really must be the closing. To the philosophy curious, I hope I lived up to my promise, and I hope you continue to pursue your interest in philosophy. I'll continue to do my best to help you do that. In closing, above all, know this. You are a philosopher. You have no choice but to be a philosopher, so it behooves you to be a good philosopher. That's right, you. Yes, you are actually doing philosophy every time you state what is, or what ought to be, which you do a lot, I'm here to tell you. You assert what is and what ought to be all day, every day. And every time you do, that is you doing this thing called philosophy. To make any sense of our life, I think we all can agree, you need at least a working theory of what is and what ought to be. Everyone is a philosopher, like everyone is a singer. Everyone is a comedian. We've all thrown an ill zinger. You may not be a professional philosopher, or even a good philosopher. You might suck as a philosopher, but you are a philosopher because you have no choice but to be a theorist about what is and what ought to be. I have a philosophy, and so here I will voice it. I will voice it to vet it, so others can wreck it, shred it, embed it, or maybe cred it. I will see if anyone gets it, or if everyone rejects it. Until the next time, this is my exit.